Because someone needs to do it. The Walt Benetti radio program on WGSO 990 AM.
Hey, welcome back. Thanks again for spending part of your Monday with us. Early voting begins tomorrow for the big election, November 6th. And joining us now is a candidate for the 34th Judicial District in St. Bernard Parish, Gregory Rome. How you doing, Gregory?
I'm doing great, Walt. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
You're welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you want to be a judge.
Sure. My name's Gregory Rome, and I'm running for judge in St. Bernard Parish, as you mentioned. I'm a St. Bernard native. I've lived in St. Bernard all my life, with the exception of a little time in exile after Katrina. I graduated here from high school in Jackson. I went on to Loyola. I graduated first in my class. And then I went to Tulane Law School for law school, where I did a ton of original research, and I published a book on Louisiana law. So then I came back to the parish, and I opened my own law practice with my mother, Sharon Williams, where we've represented people all over the state for the last 9 years. And while I was in law school, Judge Kirk Vaughn, the man who's retiring, whose seat I'm running for, selected me to be his law clerk. So I worked for Judge Vaughn, helping him write hundreds and hundreds of judgments and opinions and handle the business of the court for 11 years, from my first summer of law school until this past June, when I resigned to run for his seat. So that's why I want to be the judge.
So you can jump right in.
I'm ready to start tomorrow if I could.
You know the processes, you know what's involved, and you have the experience and obviously the desire to move up and replace Judge Vaughn.
Yeah, that's correct. I have the best experience, I have the best education, and most importantly, I have the right experience. I've done all of the business of the court over the last 11 years.
Well, before we get into your opponent and some of the scandals about him, tell us about your ideas and what you can bring to the 34th JDC as far as modernizing and bring things up to date.
That's really the core. I want to make the courts more efficient, because litigation is harder and takes more money and time than it needs to right now. So at the moment, the courthouse doesn't have its own website. They don't have official email. The court doesn't have standardized access to all of the business tools that every business takes for granted, like up-to-date productivity software, electronic calendars, any way to handle electronic documents in a reasonable fashion, not even conference calling a lot of the time. So there's a lot of room to improve the court just within the first week or two, just by getting those things into the chambers.
And tell us about the reentry court. I think that's an interesting concept.
Sure. Courts around the area have started this program called reentry courts or smart supervision, depending on where it is. And the general idea is that previously, under the old way, when somebody would come out of jail after years on a conviction, they would just be kicked out onto the street, basically, with a parole officer. They didn't have any place to land. They didn't have any support. So there was no way for them to reintegrate into outside life in a way that made them a productive, useful citizen. And instead, a lot of times, they would fall into the same traps that got them in jail in the first place. So they would be on this revolving door right back into jail. So a reentry court is a sort of a confederation of programs between the court, law enforcement, community leaders, community services, and businesses, where when someone comes out of jail, they have people there who will guide them. They'll have, a list of employers who don't mind hiring felons or whatever. They'll have a list of people who don't mind renting their apartments to people who've been in jail, so they can get the services and the support they need to reenter society in a meaningful way. And that's good for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's important. So there's no recidivism, and there isn't the revolving door that it's hard enough when you have a criminal record to re-enter society and get a job and get a house and an apartment and things like that. They do need a little bit of extra help to keep them on the straight and narrow so they don't fall back on their criminal ways.
And we already have a lot of those programs in place, but they're not connected. There's no way to get everybody into this package where they can put all of the pieces together. Like if there's an organization that provides mental health services, a lot of people won't know about that, and they won't get it in time. The same thing with addiction services or other drug rehabilitation services. And that's one of the things courts can do best outside of just dealing with crime in the courtroom by judging. They're sort of a resources switchboard where they can connect people and families with the things that they need.
We are speaking with Gregory Rome. He is a candidate for the 34th Judicial District in St. Bernard Parish. And as you mentioned, you are a native of St. Bernard. You've lived there your whole life, except for a little time after Katrina. And a lot of people obviously had to leave after Katrina, especially in St. Bernard Parish. But there is some question about where your opponent actually lives.
Yeah,
Tell us about that.
There's no question that my opponent owns a house in Chalmette. It appears that he bought that house before he qualified to run for judge last time. But he's had a house in Slidell since 2008, and I believe that's where he really lives. So at the beginning of the election, at the beginning of the campaign, a few people came up to me and said, well, I'm not voting for him. He doesn't live here. And I was intrigued because I had no idea. So I started driving past the house that he put on his registration forms, and every night it didn't look like anything moved. The same lights were on all the time. The car stayed in one spot most of the time. So my campaign hired a private investigator to keep tabs on my opponent. And for 2 weeks, they followed him, and he was in St. Tammany in Slidell every night, except for one that he spent in the Chalmette house. So I don't think he lives there. But, Walt, I have a question for you. Have you ever gotten a 0-gallon usage water bill at your house?
No, not at all.
Well, let me tell you, my opponent has. There's a ton of bills in the last 14 months or so that are 100 gallons, 200 gallons, 0 gallons. What does that tell you?
That means he's not going to the bathroom.
Or he's not washing his clothes or not taking showers, I guess. But I don't think that's what it is.
That's what I think is so interesting. I mean, because I look at someone like you with the background and with the experience and the fact that you live there and you care about St. Bernard Parish and you care about Chalmette, obviously, and you want to do well, and then your opponent, nobody knows where he lives. You know, does he live in St. Tammany? Does he live in Chalmette? Just because you own a house doesn't mean you're present and you're functional within that community. And you certainly are. I mean, you worked for the judge that you want to replace for 11 years.
And that really cuts to the core of this race. In the Louisiana Constitution, there are only 2 required qualifications to be a judge. You have to have been admitted to practice law for 8 years, and you have to be domiciled in the place you're running for judge for a year before the election. And what domicile means in the law is that's your place of habitual residence. Those are the words in the Louisiana Code. You know, that's the question. Where do you habitually reside? I don't think a water bill with no usage on it shows that he habitually resides here.
Well, tell everybody in the last 40 seconds or so that we have how they can follow you, what your website is, and also on Facebook, how they can find out more about you and get involved in your campaign the last couple of weeks.
Absolutely. We'd love to have them. We have a website at www.electgregoryrome.com. They can find us at Facebook at Elect Gregory Rome. And if they want to come see us, we are having an Amanda Shaw concert at the Aycock Barn in Araby next Sunday, the 28th, from 2 to 4, and we'd love to have everybody come out.
Well, I love Amanda Shaw, and I know a lot of people do, and we appreciate your time, and good luck in the race, and certainly with your experience and your background, and the fact that you live in Chalmette, and you live in St. Bernard Parish, and you're there every single day. I mean, that should weigh on people's minds as they go out and they vote, and like we said, early voting begins tomorrow. We're going to take a quick break for the news, and when we continue, we will be speaking with Secretary of State candidate Rick Edmonds when the Walt Benetti radio program continues on WGSO 990 AM, WGSO.com, and the TuneIn radio app.